I'm going to show that we can accept meaning statements at the face value without committing ourselves to a relational theory of meaning. Now, you see, what this boils down to is that, for example, Quine draws a distinction. It's nice how people like dichotomies if they're their own dichotomies, and dislike dichotomies if they're somebody else's. Quine is enamored of a dichotomy between the theory of meaning and the theory of denotation. And he rejects meaning theory and accepts the logical semantics of denotation. There's a dichotomy then which he works with, although he discountenances the analytic synthetic and the others. Now I'll have something to say about those topics as well. But let me then, the basic step that I make, and which runs throughout the whole argument, is the account that I'm going to give of meaning. As I argue that if we can get an account of meaning which does justice to the way the word functions, and yet doesn't require meaning to be a relation, this will enable us to have a theory of intentionality and of mental acts which is not a relational type, and it will enable us to have a non-relational theory of truth, and so on. So the crucial step concerns meaning. Now, I need a little machinery here. The first thing I'm going to do is to call attention to some things that are obvious, and then work from the obvious. Or things that should be obvious, because as you know, what's obvious to one person is either unintelligible or absurd to another. But now, consider, for example, the following statement. Yellow is an adjective. Okay, now this is a sentence which has a subject, copula, and has a predicate. It's a sort of predicate. What we have here is a verb which is singular. And this suggests that yellow here is functioning as a singular term. Okay. Now, there's no reason why we shouldn't accept that. In some sense, it's obvious that yellow is a singular term here. But then, everything hinges on what our conception of a singular term is, what our paradigm for being a singular term is. We may have a name paradigm or a definite description paradigm, in which case we may tend to assimilate all singular terms to the paradigm that we have. And thus, a philosopher who is already, as it were, platonistically inclined will tend to think of this singular term as the name of an attribute, if you will, or of a name of a Platonic entity, which is a special. I mean, after all, it would be a Platonic entity which concerns the English language. But then Plato has a Platonic entity of justice, and there can be Platonic entities which concern forms of human activity. And since the English language, as a language, is intelligible, there must be, for a Platonist, a form for the intelligibilities of it. And the word yellow is, in some sense, one of the intelligibilities of the English language. And so one might have the notion that the word yellow is functioning here as the name of a Platonic object. There's an alternative, obviously, but one which has to be looked at carefully. And this is one I want to recommend to you. I want to recommend you another way of looking at it, and that is that the word yellow here is functioning as short for a yellow, or the yellow, is an adjective. I call this type of singular term a distributive singular term. And I call it a distributive singular term because it enables us to make a remark about all the members of a certain group. In other words, this, in effect, is tantamount to yellows. Put the S after the quote. Yellows are adjectives. In other words, The alternate Platonic way of construing this singular term is a way which makes use of a special kind of singular term which we all recognize exists, in language. So yellow as an adjective can be, with a little, just a minimum of Procrustianizing, can be rationally reconstructed with a minimum of torment into a statement which involves a distributive singular term as the subject. Okay, now once this little gnat has been swallowed, I think you'll be ready for the camel. All right. Now, according to the form here, we could say then yellow in the logical term. We could say yellow and then use an inclusion sign. Adjective. And this would have the same form as, let's say, dogs are lions, which would be dog included in lion. Where this is equivalent in quantification theory to, for every x epsilon dog implies x epsilon lion. So this would have the form for every x epsilon yellow implies x epsilon adjective. Now I should, to be more precise here, put yellow in English as an adjective because one has to have a reference here to the fact that yellow is functioning here not just simply as noise, but as a word in the English language, a word which has a certain kind of function. And that brings me to my next theme. There are sortal words, like lion and dog, which classify according to biological traits of interest. And there are words which classify in terms of function. And furthermore, there are words which classify both with respect to what we might call the function server and the function. In other words, let me put it this way, consider the word pawn as a word in chess. Something is a pawn not by virtue of its shape or size, but by virtue of having a certain function in the game of chess. A function which is expressed by means of the rules concerning what it is correct and what it is incorrect to do in chess. Rules which constitute chess as opposed to rules of strategy for winning. All right, well, pawn is a word which clearly is a sortal word. We have the function, the form x is a pawn. Pawn is a classifier according to function, but it also, of course, to many people who have been familiar with a particular kind of chess set involving certain shapes, the word pawn would have as its criteria of application not only a certain kind of functioning, but a certain specific empirical kind of shape, for example, or material. Well, we can imagine, of course, that the word pawn can become a classifier which classifies in a purely functional way, and by this I mean that it makes reference to empirical characteristics only so generically as to specify what kinds of similarities and differences and movabilities there must be in order for something to serve the function. You might say the minimal descriptive generic characterization which is implied by the functioning. All right, so the word pawn is a functional classifier, and it can be so used in such a way that the criteria are, I will call them purely functional, because I will put into that phrase purely functional an allowance for the minimal generic characterization of the kind of similarities and differences there must be among the objects in the domain in order for them to serve that kind of function. Obviously, something that cannot be, in some sense, moved couldn't be change its place, couldn't be a pawn. Although even here we can get thinking very abstractly, and you can think of all kinds of weird ways in which a game of chess could be played. And I just